One fateful day, two friends found a gateway into a realm of dreams. A place beyond time, beyond space, beyond that which is known to man. Here lies infinity, a portal into the imagination and the supernatural. Amidst the eerie, the bizarre, the strangely unsettling, the girls felt right at home. And so they welcome you to this realm of shadow and substance. Keep your imagination alight and take a step, dear listener, into the fifth dimension.
Hello to our listeners and welcome to the Fifth Dimension podcast where we are discussing all things the Twilight Zone. I'm Parvati Ramkumar and with me I have my co-host Medhavi.
Hi everyone.
Today we're discussing quite an interesting episode. It's called Mr. Denton on Doomsday. I actually didn't expect to see cowboys here, in any case.
Yep.
I'll try to summarize this as briefly as possible. Basically, the plot of this is that there's an old washed out gunslinger who's called Al Denton. He was the quickest draw in town, but something happened and he was riddled with guilt because he had all these duels with various people and he killed them. Those duels are to the death and those deaths are preying on his mind and that turned him into an alcoholic. He has also lost some of his skill because of that and he's a laughingstock in that town. One day he meets a very impeccably dressed character who calls himself Henry J. Fate, who somehow or the other gives Al Denton his skills with a gun back. Now, because he has this skill back, he knows that people are going to challenge him again. And Al then decides to just go sober. He's been an alcoholic for a very long time. So he decides to go sober. And as he goes sober, just as he expected, someone decides to challenge him. This guy, Denton, he is so insecure about going into another duel that he's not even able to practice and he decides to run away. But what happens is fate intervenes again and we'll discuss what he did in the spoiler section. What did you think of this, Medhavi? How would you rate this on the Spookometer?
This is again, Parvati, a very compelling tale, I would say. Personally, I found it very intriguing.
Yeah.
Similar to the last episode that we watched about Lou Bookman, right? And that was equally fascinating, but at the same time, not really scary at all. It was just a heartwarming story,
Yes.
but in a twisted way at that.
Yeah.
I would say on a Spookometer, this again rates at about 2, not particularly spooky. It did have that slight unsettling element, but nothing beyond that. How about you?
I would rate it a 2 as well because, like you said, it wasn't scary in that sense. It was very unsettling. And you do wonder who this guy, Henry J. Fate, is, particularly because he gives him a magic potion, something like a magic potion. And you're wondering what's going on here. And the ending had its twists. All of that was very eerie. And there were some very unsettling moments. But scary? No. Definitely not scary.
Yeah. I've felt that this falls almost into like this, it's like a reverse tragedy, right? So it begins on a note of extreme pathos, like you feel horrible about this person, he's in a pathetic state. And gradually it goes into an almost reverse tragic fate. So his trajectory changes completely over the course of the story, and he lands in a far better position towards the end than he was in the beginning, and that is what is so interesting to trace throughout the entire episode.
That's true.
So that was that I it's difficult to peg down the genre for this show, but yes, the like you said, the Western setting, that is something one did not expect not for Rod Serling's introduction in the previous episode.
True. And it still doesn't strike you that this is an actual and complete Western until you see it, and then you find, the saloons and the dresses and the dust. Oh my God, there's so much dust. And
absolutely. And the guns, of course.
Oh yes, the guns and the duels. The duels are very unsettling. And Denton, like you said in the beginning, it's quite tragic because he's drunk, he's made fun of, and he has to sing. It's very upsetting to watch all of that, and he's so disheveled and he looks like he's lost everything, his peace of mind, his wealth. It looks so upsetting, it looks sad, and you know that he's going through a hell of a lot. You know that he's got these demons in his head, but you just don't know how this thing is going to play out. And then when Henry
Yeah.
J. Fate suddenly shows up, you're thinking, now things are going to get interesting because he's smiling all the time, he's well dressed, he's got
Yes,
something else up his sleeve.
exactly. Exactly. And the most interesting part was how he was observing
Ah,
Denton the whole
yes.
time. He was just observing him so closely. I loved those shots of which kind of alternate between Denton and
Hmm.
Henry J. Fate. So
Yes.
he is doing something, Denton is doing something, and in most cases it's something very pathetic, very sad, and then
Yeah.
just the scene shifts quickly to Henry J. Fate just looking at him, just observing him very closely, and
Yeah.
eventually something happens which is very jarring, but at the same time you know that this guy Henry J. Fate is up to something.
Yeah, I think one aspect of Henry J. Fate that really made me curious is his smile, because he's always
Hmm.
smiling. And you know that he's up to something. He's got something, some trickery up his sleeve, and you never
Absolutely.
know. And I also thought if Denton is going to trust him with something, his life, or his, even if he's going to buy something from Henry J. Fate, he better be careful, because that smile is very mysterious.
Absolutely. And this guy, interestingly, he has the strings of fate in his hands. He can kind of control the way that these characters proceed. And he does that by maybe tempting him or getting them to believe certain things about themselves, or getting them to act in certain ways, which was very obvious from the initial gunshot that came out of that gun. The very
Absolutely.
fact that Denton found that gun lying next to him,
Odd.
yeah, that the way that fate plays everything out and ensures that things happen a certain way, very, very interesting.
Very true, very true. So I guess we could go into spoilers now. And speaking of
Yes.
fate, there's that point where he has to practice for this duel, but he's missing. And he's thinking he
Hmm.
probably needs to run away from that town because he doesn't want to stay there and, get engage
Hmm.
in another duel. And then
Yeah.
our dear Henry J. Fate shows up again with a
Yeah.
magic potion.
Uh-huh.
He,
Which
yeah.
ensures that things will go the way that he wants them.
I don't blame Denton for being very, very suspicious at the beginning. He's thinking,
Hmm.
who is this guy in a suit and why is he giving me a potion that he claims is magical? And then,
Exactly.
of course, that potion is actually magical. I think that's the supernatural element in this episode, because the potion gives him the ability to be an extraordinarily accurate shot, but it only lasts for about 10 seconds, he says. Of course, that also leads you to think, why would Henry J. Fate give him this potion, this vial for free? There has to be a catch somewhere, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is what brings me to this part that I've been obsessing over is the fact that ultimately the way that fate pulls the strings, human beings in the show are not at all privy to it, or they have no control over it. Fate just
Yes.
does it in his own way. He just provides these potions. He just brings certain people together. He ensures that that young man that Denton finally has his final duel with, that particular duel they it debilitates both of them from ever, letting that happen again. All
True.
goes according to Fate's plan. But Fate is just doing that to fix things, to make their lives better. That is what is so
Exactly.
fascinating. Like the way that fate function is to pull those people out of either a miserable condition
Ah.
or to prevent them from landing into that miserable condition, as was the case with that young gunslinger.
Yes, that is so true. Actually, Henry J. Fate has this way of talking to people that kind of mesmerizes them and makes them go along with what he has
Hmm.
planned. And he's also pretty charming. So it comes to a
Yeah,
point where Denton is just thinking that he must do what Fate says. And he doesn't even realize what Fate is up to until he sees his challenger, his opponent. I think his name is Pete Grant. So
yeah,
until he sees that guy also downing a potion, that's when Denton realizes that something is going on here that isn't quite right, and he's probably been
exactly.
played.
Yeah, exactly. He has been played, and he has been played in a way that benefits him ultimately.
Exactly. But at that time, it wasn't very clear because it seemed like
Yeah,
fate has offered the same thing to two people, and you're wondering there's something quite devilish about that. And
yeah,
he's made a pact with both of them, but then you realize as the duel goes on, and they actually shoot each other under the potion's influence and injure each other. And then you think, yeah, that was actually a good idea. He's disarmed both of them and balanced everything out. And now Al Denton finally, maybe he can live a sober life because of fate's
yeah.
intervention. That was a very interesting twist.
Absolutely, absolutely. In a way, he has let go of the guilt that he had by processing it.
Hmm.
But at the same time, he has not fallen back into that same ways, right? Of being a
Yeah,
gunslinger and putting his own life and other people's lives at risk. He cannot do that anymore because his hand is injured. And even
yeah.
that other young fellow, he also
Hmm.
cannot do that anymore because his hand is also injured. So fate brought these two people together in order to
Yeah,
save them from a lot of misery in the future, to lift one
true.
up and to
Hmm.
prevent the other from falling into that same pit.
I think Pete Grant had a lot of arrogance in him, and he was well
Yes,
on his way to become out of control. One of the next Al Denton, I guess. And
exactly. Fate was just showing them a mirror. He was
yes,
showing Al Denton who he used to be, and he was showing Pete Grunt who he could become.
it's a potential future for both of them. One is a potential future, and the other is a past. And fate just balances everything out. And now, what you also see is that Pete Grant, after getting shot and his hand is bandaged and everything, he does get suddenly a little bit mature. So maybe that's also something that he absolutely needed, that maturity to just calm down,
Yes.
not jump into situations, be less violent. And as for Al Denton, I do believe that he could be some sort of a mentor to Pete Grant because he sees himself in that young guy and he can maybe get rid of his guilt a little bit now that he is permanently stopped from going into this sort of dual situation.
Absolutely. I think that is a very important theme over there. And on the other hand, it is also the respect that he expects,
Hmm.
or the moment he gets a tinge of that respect, the moment
Yeah.
somebody calls him Mr. Denton, at first he can't believe it and then he refuses. That is the moment he decides to sober down and go get a shave. If he is
He.
able to recover some of that former dignity that he had, or that
Exactly.
self-respect, that sense of self that he had, then that
Hmm.
means that he can become a better man.
He has it in him, and fate
Mm.
believed in him, and fate
Yeah,
brought
he
him
was
back to
pushing in
his
that
true
direction.
form. He finally found himself at the end of this episode, which is very, very well done. Also, when he talks to Liz, I think she's a saloon girl.
Hmm.
Her off the shoulder dress was quite out of place.
Oh yeah, that was very interesting. I just felt very funny that all these men are in their full sleeved shirts and their pants and their
Yes.
hats and everything, and they're protecting themselves from the dust, and
So
completely out of place.
and she just stood out. All these guys, like you said, they're wearing full sleeves and they have jackets and all of those other
Mhm.
clothing items that they have, and she's super cool. Nothing seems to affect her. The dust doesn't
Not
affect
at all.
her.
The only thing that does affect her is like emotional stuff. There haven't been significant female characters thus far in.
We've only
Yeah.
had dummies or
Yeah,
not quite their
exactly.
characters.
Or like children, like girls who
Little
are
girls,
important.
yeah,
But
dummies and little
yeah,
girls, yeah.
but even in the last episode, that was also just the prototype of a child.
She was more of a plot device than an actually
Yeah,
fully fleshed out
exactly.
character. Liz is okay, she has a moment. I think she's still a little underdeveloped, but one thing I liked about her is she seems to be the only person who actually believes in Denton while
Hmm.
everybody else is making fun of him.
Yeah.
She takes him seriously and she empathizes with him. She's the only person who empathizes with him, other than Fate, of course. She knows whoever he was, that individual that he was, is somewhere still deep within him. He can find himself again. She knows that. And she's probably the only person who knows that. She believes in his humanity. She believes in him enough that she keeps trying to get him to just clean up, sober up, and find a life again. We don't know what the motivations of Fate are, but he does do what she wanted Denton to do. Fate actually forced Denton to do what Liz wanted him to do. So that was a
Yes.
pretty interesting plot twist.
Yes, absolutely. She says right at one point that when he is asked to sing the song again, and she tells him not to sing that song. And he says that
Exactly.
I will get a drink only when I sing that song. And she says that I will
Ah,
give you a drink anyway. You don't need to sing that song. You don't need to put
exactly.
your dignity and your self respect at stake in order to get what you want. But it is fate that gives him that one final push.
Yeah, he needed that one final push because he was listening to her but not listening to her at the same time. She didn't want him to degrade himself any further, but he did need that extra something from fate to just finally
Yeah.
snap out of it and live a new life. And I loved that part where Henry J. Fate climbs into his carriage and just rides away. That was so
Yes.
nicely done.
That's just a perfect ending.
It was a very nice ending, and of course the narration was on point as it always is, and really drew me into the story. I I really like those framed narrative techniques. It's very, very interesting.
I really do. I love the beginning and ending narrative in this show. It just brings everything together so perfectly, so poetically, I must
Yeah,
say.
absolutely. It was very poetic and beautifully said, beautifully narrated. And by the time the credits roll in, you're really feeling for him and feeling this slight sense of elation that he's finally going to just be himself. I don't think there's anything we would do in a situation like this because it's a little bit out there, don't you think?
It is difficult to imagine yourself in that position. But again, what is represented on the screen or through the story is just
Ah.
these very human experiences of guilt, of loss of dignity, of feeling that you are not worthy of something. It's just taken to a certain logical extreme. This person
Yeah.
who is being humiliated every single day. But I think that is what Rod Serling does best, right? He
Mm.
brings out these social or political issues which are underlying society every day. People who are struggling, or people who have lost their position in life, people who have lost their sense of self respect and dignity,
Uh-huh.
who are being humiliated in
Mm.
different ways every day. The fact that they are being pushed more and more into that pit, they cannot find a way out of that pit, and somehow it is easier to use a coping mechanism like alcohol than putting the effort, or finding that right channel to bring
Mm.
yourself out of that pit. That is not possible for so many people, which is why things like alcoholism are even a social problem. But I would say that is what he does so interestingly. Fate is working in a way that brings that person out of that frame of mind. I found that
Yeah.
very interesting. Not to
It,
say that I would imagine myself in the same situation, but
no, no, no.
it is something that
Yeah.
is very much a social reality.
I really like that, that with the introduction of fate, and like you said, you have this character who's fallen into alcoholism. He's not able to deal with his depressive episodes. He's not able to deal with the guilt he's undergoing. And he's fallen into alcoholism, like you said. And there are so many social problems that are shown here. He's being mocked. He's being made fun of. He has to literally sing for his alcohol, which is all very sad. But I really liked that he, even though he does not have the inner strength to fight what's happening to him by himself, there are two people who do help him. One is Liz, of course, and then she's not strong enough, so Fate decides to step in himself. It's a hopeful indication that they've given in that story, especially in the case of Denton. You don't have him not, I wouldn't say wallowing, but you don't have him drowning in his depression anymore because Fate decided to take pity on him and kind of balance things out and bring him out of that. And that was a
Yes.
very interesting way of showing that someone can escape whatever situation he's in and
Hmm.
rediscover himself. In this case, I really think that Denton didn't have enough resolve himself, and through some divine providence, it came from outside. That's a very hopeful
Yes.
plot point, and I like that. I like that a lot.
I do
And
like that very much,
yeah,
and it's so different from these rather bleak narratives where fate
exactly.
works in the most horrible ways possible.
Ah.
Here, fate's intervention is very beneficial, very positive,
And quite
incredibly.
charming. And yeah, I think we have discussed all of what we needed to, Medhavi. And it was a lot of
Yes.
fun. We discovered so many new aspects to the story while we were talking.
That's the most fun part of it. I hope we continue to do that in the episodes to come. I'm quite
Yeah,
excited for the next one.
me too. I'm very excited and I'm really looking forward to recording the next one. And thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode and hopefully you'll join us next time. Thank you, Medhavi.
Thank you, Parvati, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Bye bye.